we also could cover. I mean, I sent you guys an article today. What was that article? It was nuts. Or I read the article about the stealth addresses, and we could cover that. Oh, Doodles. We could talk about that later. Doodles buying the brand mark for Rick and Morty.
Rick and Morty.
That's another level.
Who owned it before Doodles bought it?
Huh? They own themselves. No, that's not true. It actually says in the article, and we could cover that. But I say we actually show Allison some love. Allison, if you're out there, you gave us the best compliment last week, and we wanted to show you love and asked you, what did you want to hear about? And the guys and I have been chatting. We've been talking about your questions. So for those who are piping in right about now, Allison asked a question, and I wish I could pull it up, but she asked, I want to hear about your opinions on whether or not Ethereum will flip Bitcoin. And you're in a good audience here because you got some level-headed people, you got some maxis, and you got some people that don't care so long as they make money. And represents all of us. So we're going to first and foremost actually address this question by Allison. So guys, how do you begin to answer the question, will Ethereum ever flip Bitcoin? I feel like I'm throwing a piece of raw meat in like a dog fighting cage.
Yeah,
just knowing where
like,
Jarrett stands.
Who's in the cage? Is it pit bulls or is it like little like chihuahuas, you know?
Yeah. How do you begin to answer that, Jarrett?
Yeah, so this is a classic question for Ethereum people and maxis, I guess Bitcoin maxis, but it's like, okay, I first want to start by saying that this is only really a conversation on Ethereum. Like, I don't really think maxis pay attention to this too much.
Bitcoin
they're
maxis.
like, yeah, they're like long-term case like their long-term use cases very much. Oh, hey, Allison. Yeah, this is totally for you.
This is for you.
Yeah, this is literally for you. Their long-term use case is very much like they're Usain Bolt in a race. And maybe he's not even a good example because he got so good he could actually like look around in a sprint. But Bitcoin is just going to continue on. Like, it doesn't care about anything else, right? Ethereum's the one with the CEO. Ethereum's the one with the foundation. Ethereum is the one with kind of a character tied to it. And so I just wanted to kind of lay out that context. This is totally my opinion. This is just what I see on Twitter. This is what I see like out in the blogosphere, right? Where Bitcoiners are like, cool, flip us, whatever. Long term, we know what we're going to be. Ethereum is, more centralized than you guys think. Ethereum is proof of stake, which is weak on security compared to Bitcoin, all of these things. So I want to just say that first. And then a lot of times what I've heard, and this kind of makes sense, is that Bitcoin is kind of like the gold in the sense that it will be the store of value. I think it's much better than gold. And then Ethereum is kind of like the oil, right? If we're thinking about commodities that we currently have, just to like draw it to TradFi. Yeah. And in that world, obviously the oil is way more valuable than the gold because the gold can only do so much, whereas our lives literally run on oil. Whatever you are using to listen to this was made with petroleum, right? It's a petroleum-based product because it's got plastic in it, probably on some level. So then you say, okay, and this is what Mark Cuban has famously said. This is why he's very much into Ethereum. He obviously owns Bitcoin too, but he says Ethereum has a use case. Raoul Pal says the same thing. The investment banker of like 30 years with the biggest investment banks. He's like, it has a use case. You can actually use it to do things. Whereas Bitcoin, you just kind of hold. And long-term, it may save your purchasing power. So I wanted to start by saying that, maybe throw the mic, kind of build a base, and then we can come back and I can share my opinions on when this will happen. If it happens, doesn't matter. Will it happen next run? What will it take? But what are y'all's thoughts on that? Like framing of maybe it's the oil, Ethereum's the oil to Bitcoin's kind of gold, if we're looking just at store of value. Now, for any maxis out there, don't get triggered. I'm highly aware that I think Bitcoin is a much better store of value than gold. And I can go into that if you want to go down that rabbit hole. I love that Jay's smiling because Jay's triggered. And then what do you guys think about
Lambos? That's Jay's storehouse of value.
yeah, toy Lambos. So what do you guys think about that? I like how when Jay has that smirk, he's just getting ready. He's like cocking back a punch, He's like swiveling his hips. Look at him. Looks like he did something wrong and he knows it.
100% with everything that you're saying. I would change it a little bit. I'd say Bitcoin is gold and Ethereum is the petrodollar. So not just oil, but the monetary
Petro-driven
version of
dollar.
it.
Okay. And so that's a minor distinction, but why are you making that?
I think, we were talking about this offline. I think a lot of it is linked to the way that I see Vitalik now. So
Oh yeah,
not
you were saying this. I want to hear this.
not just like the tech founder, like the stereotypical tech founder who's going to come up with really great inventions, but someone who's taking the step to now begin to understand the business and the market and have philosophy and be forward thinking for where they're trying to take their company. And so one of the things that he wrote about this weekend was the whole thing around having stealth addresses on Ethereum, so
Yeah, I
that
read that
people can
article.
so that people can trade in privacy, because right now whatever trade you make is essentially like open to the world. They can at least see who you send your money to and how much you sent and when and stuff like that. And Vitalik sort of gave the introduction to the idea of being able to hide some of that information. And I think from the moment you're able to do that legitimately, like not in like a sketchy tornado cash type of way, from the moment you're able to legitimately create some privacy for yourself on the blockchain, then it becomes cash.
What was the term he used in the article? Phantom addresses or something like that?
Is it stealth addresses? What did he?
Stealth. I'm sorry, you're correct.
Stealth
It is
addresses,
stealth
yeah.
addresses. Yeah. So I think the comparison to gold and oil is insane, in general, because it's such a worn out metaphor. I don't know what it means anymore. When we
Sure.
say storehouse of value, say for example Bitcoin versus gold, that's insane for volatility reasons. Now maybe 50 years from now there will be some leveling off of the volatility as it starts to hit the 100,000, the $1 million mark, as maybe there's some currency based adoptions. I could see that these volatilities kind of level off, but a storehouse of value, volatility is the antithesis to a store of value. Store of value is a predictable future. And though we do talk about predictable supply, you cannot talk about a predictable future unless you talk about predictable demand, in my opinion. And I know Max's could wrestle that to the ground, but for how I say, is this of like, if I had kids or my nieces and nephews, as I'm putting money away from them and I go, what is the demand for this thing? Because demand actually drives the future value of something, not supply. Supply affects it, but it doesn't drive it, in my opinion. And so I know the argument about limited supply is the thing, but this is where I would then argue against myself. Bitcoin has continuously stood as a currency, and all other cryptos are playing like multiple hats. Like, who am I in front of? I'm in people who are into trading. I'm a currency. I'm in front of people who are into tech. I'm an app. And it's like, that's cute because that is what the tech is, but that's a hard sell. And Bitcoin has always been a very clear sell in that we are a currency and that's what we're made to be. Now, I'm going to pepper this for a second with a conversation I had with Krez yesterday. Crescenda, who works for Bitcoin Association, and I finally got her on the phone. Go look her up. She's a phenomenal community builder. She's out of the Philippines, but she's been hired as the social media manager for Bitcoin Association. She is a phenomenal networker. Go find her. She's phenomenal. And she's sharp as a tack from the tech. She could answer tech questions about BSV, Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. And I finally grilled her and I said, what is this mess? She said it like this. She said, get involved in the community. You can post about anything except currencies. We will reject all posts about crypto as currencies. I said, no, that's interesting. And she said, I want to emphasize that, Grant, to emphasize that BSV is focused on tech stack, not currencies. We do have tech stack within Bitcoin and the Lightning Network and other technologies they're working with, but they're focused on governments. For example, I didn't know this, the island nation of Tuvalu, am I saying that right? They're having to evacuate their islands because of climate change. They're backing up all of their government documents on BSV. and they're running their citizenship on BSV because, and I see your face, Jay. Wait, Bitcoin's a currency. Like, how do you work? No, BSV is what they claim. They claim. I don't claim. They claim it's closer to Satoshi Vision. This is what Dr. Craig Wright aligns himself with. This is like Craig Wright's project, and Mr. Satoshi allegedly, right? And they're focused on, can we create government solutions with Bitcoin's original vision? If you read the white paper, it never mentions digital currencies or digital cash. It has and I'm like, well, that's interesting. So my point though is let's contrast what Krez is saying about BSV to BTC, Bitcoin. But if Bitcoin remains focused on being a currency, I think that use case is clear enough and simple enough that it will become crypto gold. Ethereum as oil is the thing that always throws me off. I think Ethereum as a highway to everything else, as backbone technology, is a better metaphor for me. It's us finally installing the US highway system or the Canadian highway system that's starting to connect multiple cities as a unified, understood set of rules and frameworks, basically the underlying coding system. I think then Ethereum might have a shot. Jay, I'm going to turn it over to you. Any feedback on any point, or either of you, any feedback or pushback on any of it? Go. You went mute, bro.
I'm
Jay,
muted. My bad.
yeah,
My
there you
bad, G. No real pushback on it from my side. I didn't think of BSV in that way. I guess maybe I'm not like tuned into it a ton, but actually what you said just now about the white paper has given me incentive to go back and read it again, because I don't remember that it not mentioning the word currency in the white paper. Like, so
I have not fact checked it. That's what they claim. And I do want to fact check it because I just assumed that it did, right?
yeah. Now I'm
Jared's
kind of
reading
like
it now.
back
Jared's
to
like,
it.
wait, I've got this on my desktop.
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
it's embroidered on my pillow. Let me read it real quick. So
If you, oh my God, I love you too. If you go to morethanblockchain.xyz, I have the two white papers of the biggest cryptocurrencies, which are Ethereum and Bitcoin. And one of the first things it says is cash. So I'm not
like
exactly
you
sure.
like Control F, you search the PDF.
No,
and
it just says cash at the top. It
what does it
says
say?
a purely peer-to-peer version of electronic cash would allow online payments to be sent directly from one party to another without going through a financial institution. I'm interested to see if it says the word currency, because if
Maybe
we're going to
that's
talk,
what she said.
yeah, maybe the word currency, because the thing is, I don't see Bitcoin as a currency.
You
I
don't.
think that that's what
Yeah,
maybe the
the word currency
original
only
intent
shows up
is.
one time.
What's up?
The word currency only shows up once in the white
Yeah,
paper.
so it does show up.
Okay.
So BSVers, and I need to dive down their rabbit hole deeper. And Joe DePinto, who came on More Than Blockchain, he talked about BSV. And the thing that I'm most attracted about BSV, and Grant, you texted this last night, is their gig size and block is ridiculous. So you can pump information into it, and it can handle crazy scale. And the other thing is that it has really, really, really low transaction fees.
Yeah.
Which I think in a world of micropayments is going to be really important, right?
Yeah.
Even
I've got an
Lightning
answer
Network.
for Tristan here from my homework, so we'll get to that. Or if you guys know, but the ZKP answer to this is nuts. We'll talk about that in a second. Keep going.
Yeah, Tristan, we're tabling that. But so one thing I would say is that I don't see Bitcoin as a currency, because I'm not using it to like trade at all. I just buy it and hold it. And there's no other currency on the planet as far as our definition of currency. Or maybe my definition of currency. Maybe we should define currency, honestly, maybe before we go forward, just as a working definition, because there's no other currency I'm holding. Like, let me show you in my little drawer here, because I think that they're in the back. I don't know if you can hear me now. I'm moved away from the mic. Somewhere in here, I have Colombian pesos, or maybe it's over there, but those have lost 30% since I was last in Colombia. So clearly I don't want to hold those. And even my dollars have lost some of their purchasing power because of inflation. And now I need more of these dollars to go buy my food basket, right? So I don't know. I
Definition
think
of currency. Let's not rewrite these things. Definition of currency.
Yes, go ahead.
A system of money in general use. The fact or quality of being generally accepted or in use. So by that definition, And by that definition, money is first and foremost a medium of exchange.
Yeah,
And it's
for sure.
also a storehouse of value, but it's not exclusively a storehouse of value. You have to be a medium of exchange to be considered money. And Jarrett, I would think that a maxi would assume for us to get to $1 million Bitcoin and then start using smaller denominations known as Satoshis, for us to get there, that level of adoption has to assume it's become a fairly accepted form of currency, right?
I don't think so at all. I think the
No.
future is the hybrid Bitcoin is a hybrid. What is it? The hybrid hyper Bitcoinization model. And if you can say that 3 times fast, it's impressive, Allison. Sorry, you have to hear these these people from the colonies with their weird accents say that. But the hybrid hyper Bitcoinization model,
Okay.
which essentially is the idea that everything's going to get sucked up into essentially dollars and Bitcoin eventually. Where people use Bitcoin as their savings and people use dollars, probably USDC, and we can talk about that. It looks like CBDC. Tristan's onto this. That's what we're going to use to exchange, and everything else is just going to be in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that's how the world would kind of be. Now, I expand that a little bit more because I don't think the dollar is always going to be there. I think you're going to have the yuan. I think it's going to be the Chinese yuan, the dollar, and the euro. And I do think over the next 50 to 60 years, all other currencies are basically just going to fold into those. All the currencies in Latin America will essentially fold up into the dollar.
So just the pound just gone?
No, well, sorry, the British pound, and then what, Switzerland, whatever that is. Like there will be some of these ones that I do think will stick around, but the main players will be the euro, the yuan, and the dollar. The British pound, I actually will be, I believe,
Until we're
there.
interplanetary, and then I think we'll actually start considering. I mean it. Like I think that once we're interplanetary, we'll go through a period of what we consider like Earthlings, or like we won't be as divided country-wise for a period of time.
For sure.
But that's too far down the road to care.
That's far down the road. But point being that I don't see Bitcoin as a currency. I don't think many maxis see it as a currency, even if that was the original. Like the way I understood, and I think Joe DePinto explained this on the podcast, and now I need to go back and listen because BSV is fascinating. He sent me a bunch of information. I scratched the surface, but I want to learn more because I think that BSV is a huge real world use case, which is what we all really want to see in the space. So for me though, and for many maxis, it's like, or the way I understood was Bitcoin happened and then you basically couldn't transact it because it became too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think the BRICS nation's currency will hold a spot? No, I don't. No, Russia's going to get
which BRICS nation? Well, he's saying China, so the yuan.
Yeah, right? China. I'm saying the yuan, but like
India,
South Africa, no. Why
China,
they don't?
Is it? Yeah, it is South Africa. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I mean India and China are the only possible.
India and China. Okay, maybe India, but the rupee's just going to inflate so much against all these other ones. If we go to the hybrid, I don't see how that works. You know,
and the Anglophile nature of a lot of Indians too. Like it's funny. Like a lot of my Indian friends, they are very Indian. They're proud of being India, but if you watch their culture growth, they're watching all American television. There's this Anglophilia that goes on. Like I'm very interested in what America or what Anglos are doing. And so I have to assume that like if we're actually going to start using Satoshis or USDCs, and especially with as much as they depend on the political West or the political North's economy, they're just going to start using those currencies. I feel like myself. Go ahead.
Yeah. So anyways, I think we should have a whole episode too where we talk about how Bitcoin forked into Bitcoin Cash, and then that forked into Satoshi Vision. Because what I understand, Satoshi Vision with Craig Wright, the whole idea was like, hey, Bitcoin dropped the ball on being a currency. It dropped the ball on being something we can transact and use easily. So if we can't use it easily and everyone can't use it, how can we possibly build, as you're saying, an island nation that's going to get crushed by climate change, build it in where we can use that to use it almost kind of like an Ethereum with smart contracts, or, a way to basically put files on the blockchain. Yeah. That's my understanding. So I push back a little bit. If someone asks me is Bitcoin a currency, I'm like, hell no, I can't use it. None of my friends would want my Bitcoin. Literally, they would not want my Bitcoin.
But of all the crypto ATMs, though it's relatively small, they're only Bitcoin ATMs. And to your point, if it is even just a savings account, it has to be relative to other cryptos. It has to have some currency component that is going on with semi-general use, which would meet the definition, I think. if hyper Bitcoinization happens, like you're saying, like on date, like reality in the boots on the ground. Hey, how does this move into my savings? Well, I moved from this wallet to this wallet. Someone paid me in this. Well, no, they paid me in USDC here, but then they paid me in Bitcoin here. There has to be some velocity happening with it to make it even viable for that. I would assume. Jay, you have a thought on the tip of your tongue, and we probably mowed over
wait,
it.
can I inject one more thing on the oil?
Yeah.
I disagree with your idea that it is the highway system, because the highway system is a static thing. It will change every once in a while, but like you put up a bridge and it sits there for 60 years until it rusts out. I think the highway is the internet. That was already built. That's not moving. But the thing that's dynamic that moves across it is the cars and the gasoline. And the gasoline is really the thing that moves itself.
Maybe the rules of the highway or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I think that's where I always kind of like the idea of Ethereum being the gasoline, because the smart contracts on Ethereum and your ability to do that allow the thing to move with just essentially just super simple if then statements, right?
Okay.
If he pays me this, or if that goes higher, then I sell, like it's a really simple metric. So that's where I wanted to say, I think it's not, I don't see Bitcoin as a currency. And I would also push back and say that I think Ethereum is a lot more dynamic than just being the base layer, because the base layer is really the internet. And then on top of that, we're able to build with Ethereum and then put in smart contracts. And so that's what I want to say. Jay, throwing the mic to you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had a couple of points along the way. I've sort of forgotten those because I've just been listening to what you were saying. But
Sorry.
I like the very last thing that you said about Ethereum not just being a base layer, of it evolving into other things, because I think that's necessary for it, right? Like, could you imagine if Google was just a search, or if Facebook was just a place where you put pictures, like those companies would not have grown. Ethereum definitely has to go beyond just being the blockchain where everyone builds their apps. It has to be a lot more creative. And I think one of the things that's really cool about this space in general is that people tend to lean towards creativity. Lots of times we end up getting scammed as a result, and losing a lot of money. But we tend towards creativity, and then that's what's allowed for the industry to flourish.
Yeah, and to that point, I was very concerned about Ethereum actually being the static road that Jarrett is talking about until the merge. The merge was so smooth and successful that it was acting like the highway, but this is the dynamism. The internet, like if you think about our metaphors, we're talking about the fluidity and the moldability, the changeability of the thing we're using as a metaphor. And you're right, the internet is probably the road that all this was built on, in part because of what it would take to change the internet. Really would be a massive, unprecedented change. And so we're building on top of it's kind of an older technology if you think about it. Now we've got Ethereum coming along, and say, for example, Ethereum relative to Polygon, or Ethereum relative to I guess BSV even. These things are changing relatively quickly, but that also means they're not established yet. And here's Ethereum that's balanced this act of being fairly established, but also if the merge did not happen, A, and B happened smoothly, it would be in threat of being too static in this space. But and I think we said before we got on the call, we were talking about how Polygon, for the longest time, and still I believe, Polygon threatens to take a lot of developer brain drain and talent away from Ethereum, because they are not only a layer 2, and we could talk about the technology under that hood, but they're also layer 0. They are their own blockchain. And they've been taking a lot of talent. They've been doing really good partnerships. I think Starbucks was released on Matic or Polygon. Am I correct about that? And a bunch of other programs launched on Polygon's own blockchain, not as a secondary blockchain, as a layer 2. That's important. These contracts are happening on its own layer 0. And so when you see those sorts of shifts, or all these developers that left or bridged from Solana to Polygon, it's like, wait, we can't ignore this. But to your point, Jay, if Vitalik can continue to mature as a CEO and then actually leverage this road, it's like a programmable road. Imagine if you could go, I need a new exit over here, And instead of having to pull out dump trucks and asphalt and earth movers, you started changing code. And like the Matrix, a new road appears. Then Ethereum would be the road, but it's a programmable road, right? And that would work. But I think you're right about oil right now, based on how you reframe me. I'll take that. But I think that Ethereum runs the risk, if they're not careful, to like surge ahead and then fall behind. And I'm not talking about market cap. I'm talking about market position, I guess, in people's minds. Let's unless you have feedback on that, I'd like to maybe try to tackle something that Tristan's talking about here.
Yeah, before we move
Please.
into the kind of the CBDC and how that builds into this, maybe we should all. I'm just want to say, to answer Allison's question kind of like
Sure.
directly.
Yeah.
I think the flippening may happen, but I think it will be something that is kind of a momentary thing. As someone who's very much into Bitcoin and sees that as something that's powerful, I think long-term Bitcoin is going to, as far as market cap goes, right? Because that's what the flipping is all about, right? Big bank take little bank. Like, who has a bigger bank, right?
Yeah.
I think that may happen maybe in the next run, depending upon what shiny object happens. In 2017, the shiny object was ICOs, right? Where everyone just dropped coins. 2021, in that bull run, it was NFTs. And so that really helped out Ethereum a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was reading, maybe it was yesterday or today, was like half of the gas fees recently were all just on Bored Ape Yacht Club for all NFTs.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
if NFTs don't exist overnight and people just get into DAOs and dApps, I think it's a much slower thing, because I don't think DAOs and dApps are as tied to so much speculation and then money into the market. So I think it may flip, but I don't think long-term it matters, because if Bitcoin does what maxis believe it to be, what maybe happens in its narrative, then it will be an ephemeral thing and it will move on. But it will be, when that happens, it could happen in 2025 in the next bull run. It will be a monumental moment, because it will be really cool, because basically Bitcoin is the first out. So it got first to market, and it's kind of up until now been infallible. Whereas Ethereum's been on this rocky road, and it's kind of like the tortoise and the hare. So if it happens, I think it will be ephemeral. I think people will celebrate it. It will be something to look at. But long term, I would expect Bitcoin to really overpower it. But what do you guys think?
I was going to say, Jay, what is your kind of parting thought on the flippening? If, when, how, and do we care?
Do we care might be the most important question. It's tough to say when, right? Because we were all thinking like, 2023 is going to be a shit year, and now it looks like we're back. So it's tough to gauge that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think it will be important. I think it'll be something that sort of sets the tone for the market, right? It'll mean that we've, as a market, have become more mature, where it's not just based on the speculation of Bitcoin. We're also now taking into consideration the traditional metrics of finance and applying that, I think, in the direction of Ethereum. I think that's what Ethereum is going to be. And you know what? Maybe that's why we're seeing sort of like this pump and people coming back to crypto. It's because Ethereum, now that it's proof of stake, and they're making all of these moves towards creating an ecosystem that it's more easy for people to build on, and is more familiar with traditional finance. That these financial organizations are like, oh, okay, Ethereum looks like something much more familiar to us than it was before, and so they're gonna make that shift towards Ethereum. That could happen, but I think whatever happens, or whenever it happens, it's going to be a massive psychological shift for the entire industry.
And I think you get at a great point, and I'll wrap my thoughts up here for Allison. And then Leslie's got a fantastic question, but I do want to honor Tristan's question, and we'll look at Leslie's questions. Phenomenal question, Leslie. Stick around for that real quick. You mentioned psychology. My first reaction to Allison's question, or anyone's question like this, is, okay, I hear the question, and from a kind place, so what? What does this mean to us if that happens? And my first thought is, well, it's not a big deal. If developers are passionate and working, they're passionate and working. And for Ethereum, whether the market cap right now, it's I think at like 198, 199, something like that, whether it's at that or whether it catches up to Bitcoin and they're neck and neck at 49, 490 or wherever they're at. Let's say it does that. So what? It's just market cap. Dev's going to dev, right? Like that's how it is. Except you do talk about the psychology of setting the tone. Super important. But what is the psychology and what sets the tone? In my estimate, incentive. If someone is deving, and if a crypto that has a strong code base, a strong developer base, and a halfway decent, and Ethereum has a halfway decent adoption rate on the front end users, they're used to Ethereum wallets and Ethereum transactions and Ethereum apps. But there's also a radical run on the currency. The incentives to dev there is like, well, if Google App Store was incentivizing its app developers 10x, 9x, 100x what, and Apple was incentivizing its developers, you're going to suddenly see a ton more apps. So I'm going to push back on myself and go, well, so what? Is there's massive new incentive on the market. And if they can do that, they can take the mind share. So I think it does matter, but I don't know if it has direct impacts on their roles in the future of Web3. Allison says, thank you guys. Really value the conversation. More questions from the land of the pound and funny accents in the future. Keep them coming, Allison. You're one of our favorite people out there. We love having you on the show. Can I give like
I just want to make a point. I want to make a point.
Please.
Allison, we have the funny accents, right? Y'all created the language. So we're always going to be.
Yeah, it's English or is it English? What are we talking about?
Yeah. What are we talking about?
What we talking? We got the New Yorker, the Southerner, and the Islander, and we're all, so we're the ones with the funny accents. Real quick, Tristan, I want to honor this, and then I think we got some real interesting stuff in queue here. Tristan asks, how does the vision of BSV pave the way for a hybrid answer of both through to CBDCs designed to be utilized by large governments and still using the alleged use of currency? Now, I want to make sure I got all that. Do you guys have any framework for what he's talking about? Because this is fresh in my mind from my conversation with Krez. We talked about this, but what thoughts do you initially have, if any?
I'm not sure. Designed to be utilized by large governments is still using the alleged use of currency. I'm not sure I understand the question.
It's like coming at it from like a tech perspective. Like, what is it about BSV that would allow for it to be used as technology that governments can like use to save data and documents and preserve themselves long term, like a Tuvalu example, and also be able to use it as a store of value for currency and monetary purposes. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe I feel like maybe I don't know enough about BSV to answer.
Well, let me present the dilemma that Krez posed, and she answered. But I'll just pose the dilemma at first. She revealed to me, and I've never thought about this. In a world of zero knowledge proof, and just for those who don't know and are not used to the phrase, it's a very goofy phrase, but it's a cryptographic scheme where the prover is able to convince the verifier. Basically, if I go to a coffee shop, the coffee shop can convince the bank that the statement is true. The customer wants to give me money without revealing who the customer is. Right now, Visa and MasterCard knows when Jay or Jarrett or I buy coffee at the local Starbucks. They know who that is. They know what happened. Zero knowledge proof is like the bragging rights of most crypto platforms that we're trying to make a world where the three of us could buy coffee. The coffee shop has a smooth transaction with the bank, but no one knows whether it was Jay, Jarrett, or myself. In fact, it's not even the bank, it's the blockchain. We're getting around the bank, right? We don't want the coffee shop to even know who it is. Like no one, like that was the big bragging rights. And that's zero knowledge proof in layman's terms. There's a lot that goes on under the hood. That was the dilemma. How do you have a BSV that is creating a CBDC, which by definition, a CBDC is the antithesis of zero knowledge proof? Governments want to know who this is. They want to know who is spending this money. But then, so you're using it as a currency, but you also need to build tech stacks that need to answer zero knowledge proof. And for something to be a currency, It's got to be able to encounter people all over the globe, aka other blockchains. And a major limitation on blockchains, many of them, is that their zero knowledge proof does not go multi-chain. Krez posed that problem and she answered, BSV is an all-chain zero knowledge proof. And what this allows is it allows for the government, there's controls. And I would say Cardano also has this built from the ground up, aka baked in. But it allows for the government to get its required data that you own this and who are you, your identity. But it immediately, and I don't know how the stack works, I need to look closer, but for situations where zero knowledge proof is there, it's already built in that the ZKP is already effective for all other chains. And that blew my mind. She did make the claim.
That blows my mind as well. I'm going to have to figure out how that works.
Me too. She did make the claim that no one else does it. A quick search will show you there are many projects doing multi-chain ZKP projects. But apparently, and Dr. Craig Wright's a smarty pants, right? This guy is I don't know if he's Satoshi, but he is Mr. Smarty Pants. Like, he was already very wealthy with his own knowledge, so I wouldn't put it past him. So that is the BSV thing. Tristan, I think that's what BSV is trying to bridge. What do you guys know about ZKP? What do you know about currencies? And what are the problems with this?
I mean, I think you described it the way that I understand it as well.
Okay.
So it's just about trying to position the tech in a way where it can do that type of proof without necessarily having to give away the entire ban, like all of the information to figure out if a transaction is legitimate or not.
And it's what you were talking about with stealth addresses. Basically, a very complicated scheme like we're describing. Suddenly, Vitalik is like, by the way, we could just do stealth addresses. And you're like, that's pretty serious. Like, when I read your article on the heels of this conversation I had with Krez, I was like, that Ethereum just wakes up and publishes this paper and can just tack this on to their app. That's pretty profound. It's pretty profound. Any thoughts on CBDCs, Tuvalu, government BSV, Jarrett, or you want to tackle this DAF?
I want to talk about DAFs in a second, the DAF, but I don't really I'm not sure if I totally understand Tristan's comment. I will say that we should just get Krez on here because she said there was no currency. There's currency. She said there was no cash. There's cash. She said they're the only one doing ZKPs. That's not true. I don't even know if they were the first ones to even propose that type of tech. Sure. So, she also works for them. Like,
sure.
There seems to be some incentive there,
I think she's definitely a believer.
She's a believer.
She's a believer. And as would all of the people that I know would say, I'm a believer about Bitcoin, or a believer about crypto in general. Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this, and I think Leslie maybe you're listening to this, and Leslie is actually a colleague of mine who I would like to say is crypto curious, and she hopped on today to listen to
Crypto curious. How do you identify, Leslie? Crypto curious.
Crypto curious. And she hopped on to ask the DAF question, so we can go into that. But I just think it's good for Leslie to hear that, and this is something I said multiple times when I was out in Portland this past week talking with people at Mercy Corps about crypto, is that crypto is not a monolith. There's actually more infighting within crypto than there are people hating crypto from the outside. Like, we have our own issues, we have our own kind of tribalism. So going right into Leslie's question, would love to hear what you think crypto could line up with DAFs. So DAFs are donor advised funds. And really the biggest, and once again, I'm very new to fundraising. I've been around nonprofit work and international development work, but I've been on the ground.
Let me jump on it.
Oh, Jay, you want to jump? Because
I want to jump on the DAF question. I've been familiar with DAFs for a number of years, and it's actually something that's growing in popularity here in Canada.
Okay. So who wants to start? I want to hear more about this. Let's define it, and then let's talk about it.
Yeah, Jay, can you define it? And this is a word that I've only recently been kind of introduced to. This is a more high philanthropic situation. And one of the things I actually put in the private chat, because I couldn't figure out how to put it actually in the thread, and Grant, maybe you can grab from the private and post it, is that endowment.org is a really interesting thing, because basically DAOs, when they're used for good, can kind of serve as DAFs. It's basically, it's like it's honestly, it's not one-to-one, but it's so close that like we could obviously argue about the nuance. But one of the things that I've learned in my new role as a fundraising manager for a massive multi-million-dollar, international NGO here, is that the cool thing about DAFs is you can put money into a DAF, and you as a rich person can get that tax receipt right then.
Yes.
And then that money doesn't have to be spent immediately. It can sit, and then you decide upon where it wants to go, which is very similar to a DAO. And so, Leslie, a DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization where basically people come together and they, instead of, this is how it should be in theory, I don't think this is actually how it works, but instead of having like the centralized authority that's going to hold the money or look over this like Mercy Corps would if they had a DAF, you're basically relying on smart contracts that everyone can kind of see and interact with. So you're putting money into a transparent digital place that everyone can kind of access and then agree upon where that money should go. So DAOs are very much DAFs when they're used to do good. So that's definitely a way with crypto. And if you, Grant, thank you so much for dropping that in. Endowment is where you can basically create kind of like a GoFundMe, but you can say, hey, I want money to go towards this thing. Like Grant, Jay, and I come together. We say, we really want money to go towards St. Kitts because they've just had a hurricane. Jay's from St. Kitts. He's got some people down there. We want to show up for him. We're going to put our crypto community together, create an endowment page, essentially, put money in there, and Jay's going to be able to pull it out. The biggest use case we've seen from this website with endowment was when Ukraine, Zelensky basically put out, they created an endowment page. And they said, you can just drop money on our Ethereum address and it will get to people of Ukraine and support us. So
Interesting.
that's
Jay,
kind of interesting how that works.
observations
Jay,
and
please.
experience about DAFs in Canada.
So spot on what Jarrett was saying. My understanding of it is very similar. It's the example that I would give is like, let's say you have a nonprofit organization. You can create a DAF, a donor advice fund, and you go out to the donors of your nonprofit and say, hey, we can do something a little bit different with this special fund. When you give us money, we can give you back a tax receipt immediately. So like you give me $1 million, we don't have to wait until that $1 million is actually used. I can hand that to you right away. And we don't have to use the money right away. So you get all of the tax benefits without having to use any of the money. And then over time, between the donor and the nonprofit, you decide how that money is going to be used. Now, in Canada, legally, the nonprofit doesn't have to do that. But if you want to keep getting money from people, you're going to have customer experience, people who are getting their ideas and trying to figure out where exactly they want the money to go and what they want to do with it. So a lot of donors prefer to do that because let's say like this year you make $100 million more than you thought you were going to make, and you don't want to pay the tax on that $100 million. Well, I can just sort of get my tax receipt up front and then figure out what to do with the money afterwards, right? And that just makes sense. I mean,
isn't that normal to endowments? That's not unique to
coming together with DAFs, because when you put both together, now you have this opportunity to sort of like create this like almost like digital environment for donations that's not based on like traditional cash, where I'm giving things like maybe cash, but things like real estate and stuff that's highly illiquid and sort of takes a long time to sort of figure out the rules around the donations. If you're accepting funds into your DAF from cryptocurrencies and it's immediate, if you're in finance, you're familiar with the term T plus 0 or T plus 2, like in crypto it's T plus 0 because you get that money right away. It just works. It allows for the entire ecosystem to just flow a whole lot smoother, and for people on both sides of the equation to be a lot more happy with the results at the end.
What is the advised part? Is that the DAO part you're
Well,
talking
that
about,
the thing,
Jarrett,
right?
where the
Actually,
donors have higher investment? Or I'm sorry, they can have more say about how the money's being invested. What is the advisement part?
Yeah, I think it's exactly as it says. Once again, I'm super new to this. So if you're watching this, this is not even where my wheelhouse is within the current organization. But yeah, totally. The donors absolutely advise it. You know, they can obviously say if it's instead of having unrestricted funding, it's more restricted. They're definitely going to come together and decide on where that money goes. And it's not
Really?
really, yeah. And so it's very similar to a DAO. And when I was at uh, Mercy Corps this past week talking about crypto and talking about
Yeah.
NFT philanthropy and crypto philanthropy, the idea of a DAO came up. And one of my colleagues who's very crypto literate has more NFTs than I've ever seen. He's a huge collector, very Web3 literate. He looked at me, he said, "Don't worry, it's a DAF." And I was like, "Okay, yep, it's a DAF." And everyone's like, "Oh, okay." They nodded their head. So that's kind of how that goes. Looks like Jay's having some technical issues. He'll hopefully hop back on.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a really good question from Leslie.
Yeah.
Uh,
We should have her
because
on to because she's experienced in fundraising, if I'm correct. And I'd
she's
like to,
very experienced. I don't know about DAFs, but if she is, that would be interesting for sure.
well, she's got to have more experience than any of us. I mean, we got the crypto side and the DAO side, but I'd like to hear. Leslie says, AI. What?
The thing
AI?
is, it's AI DAFs or is that Al DAFs?
Yeah, like was she saying like all DAFs or like are we literally talking about Chat GPT of DAFs? I'd like to know more about that.
I
So
mean,
Leslie, a
maybe.
formal invite to have you on the show and school us on some of these fundraising things, some of these DAFs, and then maybe we could learn a thing or two about where this bridges with Jarrett's role, which is crypto philanthropy. Because if what we're saying is accurate, DAFs and DAOs go together. And this endowment link you gave us, that makes so much more sense. Like I've got a friend, he buys real estate, he puts renters in it, but he is what is known as an intentional investor. And in
Mhm.
real estate, there's intentional residents and intentional investors. And by that, I mean, if you have a down and out neighborhood and someone who traditionally comes from a higher skill, higher wage background, they will become an intentional resident. They'll make sure they buy a house in a rough neighborhood. They commit to bringing that house up in terms of property value and equity. And it's a really difficult thing to do because it's a tough neighborhood. But generally, it's like planting a garden in a desert. It usually begins to increase the property values of the immediate properties to the left and right of them, and it tends to become a seed, if you will. Now, intentional investors are the same thing. They're usually one step prior to that, where they buy a house and they do the same thing, but they then put renters in it at a lower than market rate who are maybe getting out of prison or maybe just got out of a tough divorce, and they might not be able to pay market rate, but then they ensure that they build community along the way. And if someone misses rent for a month or two, it's far more compassionate. And he came to me and said, "Grant, how can I raise more money this year?" And I was like, "Well, sit across from people elbow to elbow and ask for money, bro." Like he's really good at that. He's really good at that. But the deals aren't always there. Like to ask for money, typically the donor says, "Well, what property is this going into?" And I never thought, and this isn't necessarily a crypto thing, but it never dawned on me to go, well, he should do an endowment. But what would be very cool is if there was something in this DAF DAO hybrid that offers a sense of empowerment to the donor. And then when the deals come around, they can present deals at that time. But meanwhile, their Ethereum, their Bitcoin, or whatever holdings they had were growing at market rates. That volatility we were talking about earlier, that works really well for nonprofits because that volatility is probably going to swing up and it's not committed to line item donating. Like this is the antithesis of line item donations, right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Interesting. Jay, are you back with us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. So that's a super interesting question. I really appreciate that, man. Did we get everything answered for Allison? Do we think we answered that well? And do you think we answered the DAFs well?
I think we did. And here, Grant, I want to push back on something you said earlier in the
Please.
episode. I haven't had a chance to. Is that I don't think Bitcoin's as volatile as people think it is. I think day to day it's volatile, but I think if you look every like 5 years, if you zoom out, just when you were talking about as a store of value,
Yeah.
I think it's really good because you say, I want to give it to to my nieces and nephews, for example,
Yeah.
right? Well, if you give it to your nieces and nephews, you don't want them to spend it tomorrow or the next day or even 5 years from now. You probably want them to hold on to it for 10 or 20 years. So when they're at a place in their life and they want to make a big money decision, that's probably a house, or maybe it's a vacation, or maybe it's just taking a year off and doing a sabbatical. You want to give them that money, right? So if you're thinking about a long-term horizon, I don't think Bitcoin is as volatile as you think, or
I would
as
be
people
interested.
paint it to be.
Maybe as volatile as people paint it to be. But if I were to do a chart of inception of Bitcoin to today and took the market over the same, I'm willing to bet money that you'd see higher peaks and valleys. Now, what you would see is higher growth in Bitcoin. I agree with that. And over the long, and I think I even said this in that part of the conversation, that I do believe over time, I do believe it will grow. Do I believe it's predictable growth? I'm not sure. But in terms of volatility, the way it's measured is how are the highs and lows measured off the median? And that's all like the literal, and maybe it's too tradfi for our dialogue here. It's not as volatile as people paint it to be, but it is more volatile than any other instrument that I know of based on the highs and lows off the median or the moving average, if you will.
Yeah,
And so
that makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. But even if it's just like, even if you look at one of the best stocks in the last 10 years, right? You could probably say Amazon or Tesla is in there. It's still crushed both of those as far as how much it's moved.
Yeah, so growth
over the 10
yes.
years.
Yeah, I would
right?
not
So-
challenge the growth. Volatility doesn't mean it doesn't have growth potential and a huge
Right.
value. Yeah.
That's a great thing, because I think and so for me, that's why, like, long term, I'm like, if you're going to buy something, whether say you're going to buy gold and you're going to buy Bitcoin, you're going to buy $100 of it and just lock it away and
Yeah.
not touch it for 10 years. I'm dying for the conversation and someone to tell me that they're going to buy Bitcoin over that.
Well, you know what we need to do right
buy
here, right
gold
now.
over that. What's up?
We need to do this right here, right now. Mr. Beast did a series of videos where he said 10 years from now, 1 year from now, what my subscribers will be at. We need to look right now. What is today's show? Today is January 24th at 3:30 p.m. We need to look at the price of gold and the price of Bitcoin, and we need to assume $100.
Do it and put it into the
the comments. Hold on.
You don't actually even have to put in the amount. Just put in the price of both. And then we could always, then just multiply times 100.
Price of gold. Here we go. Price of gold. We're going to do this right now. Okay. And then price of Bitcoin. Hang on. I'm sure people have done this, and I'm sure we could paper trade this, back trade it. But forward trade, it's a whole different ballgame. And by the way, Bitcoin's over 23,000 right now.
It is.
And it already did that before. Go ahead.
Yeah. So so you're putting it in Restream. So yeah, price of gold, it's, 1955, 40 cents. Bitcoin is at 23,000. This is going to be fun. I hope we remember to do this, because
we're going to put it on the calendar, bro.
I feel very, very confident in how this game's going to play out. And honestly,
I
like,
know
Mark Cuban was on a podcast the other day with, what's that dude's name? Oh, he's a talk show host. He's kind of like cringy, but he was asking the guy if he owned gold, or they were talking about investing or something,
Yeah.
And the guy was like, yeah, I own gold. And Mark's like, yeah, but do you really own the gold, or do you own a receipt for it? He's like, oh, I don't know how that works. Who knows how gold works? And Mark was like, no. Well, you probably don't own it then. Like, it's not sitting at a vault in your house. He's like, no. I don't know. Somebody talk to my accountant. He just did the thing that many people do when they feel uncomfortable about money. They just lean into their ignorance as a badge, rather as like, I should maybe learn about this.
Yes.
And this super famous, you can go find this out. But Mark basically said, you're an idiot if you own gold. He said that straight out, right? And then he said, you should own Bitcoin. Mark Cuban.
Interesting. How old is this roughly? He's still a big fan, but how old
in the
is
last 2 weeks?
Interesting.
So
I'll have to check that out.
All the rich, all the wealthy, because they all have their funds in very high, well-groomed things, in Fidelity and Chase and Bank of America, in BlackRock. They all know. They know what's happening, and they're all putting their money into Bitcoin.
Jeff, I buy this wholesale. Take this, slap it on your pillow. Removing volatility only comes with diversification. You're absolutely right. And though one instrument might appear more volatile, what does volatility matter to Bitcoin if it's going to end up at 100,000? But you're right, volatility. And why do I care? If your growth is guaranteed, why do I care about volatility? because growth to me is not guaranteed. Volatility is predictability. And for me, though Bitcoin has a predictable supply, for me, it does not have a predictable demand. And but I can easily look at real estate, and there is a fairly predictable demand called a growth curve, and that's just less volatile to me. Those numbers off the average, but Roger's right. You want to level off the playing field, Grant. Just take your moving average, take the S&P 500 and just buy that all day, and you have relative low volatility. I get that. Jeff, are you a diversified investor or not? I'd love to know that. What about you guys? Are you diversified or not?
I heard something really cool today, kind of interesting.
Coach Jay's like, I had sushi, and let me tell you about my fortune cookie. Whenever we ask him about investing, he's like, guys,
tell me if you agree with it or not. I'm heard
listening.
Grant Cardone say this today, and it was like at the end of this talk that he was giving, and one of the things he listed a whole bunch of like financial myths, MYTHS. One of the myths was,
I know what he's about to say, and I love this.
Was it the diversification? He says, the richest people in the world did not diversify. Steve Jobs, when he died, he owned 2 companies, 2 stocks, Apple and Pixar, and he gave a bunch of other examples. It was pretty compelling.
Well, it was Warren Buffett. Yeah, it was Warren Buffett, and I've heard him talk about this too. And Warren Buffett's talked about this. He's basically said, look, you can list 50 stocks, right? And he says, somebody asked him how to invest. And he said, look, go look at 50 different companies. Okay. Then give me your top 5. And out of that, pick 2. Because the reality of it is only one of those 2 is going to make it, for 50 years or however long you want to have the money in the market. And he's like, that's why I always stay with Coca-Cola and I continue to put money in, because show me a better soft drink product. I'm waiting. And I totally believe in that. And I totally believe whatever you focus on expands. And if you want to diversify, that's fine. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Diversification are for people that don't live and breathe a market or understand something deeply. Diversification is also
I agree with that.
It's also fear-based. It's worried about, it's I'd rather get a spread of the market than, most people. Let's see what Jeff says. Most people are risk averse who like stability. God,
it's true. It's true.
It's true. Most people are risk averse. So for me, it's like you have to pick something. You're going to have to pick a horse if you actually want to build wealth over long-term growth investments. And I know who my horses are. They're definitely Bitcoin and Ethereum. That's where I'm going to start to move about 80 to 90% of all my investments. And I'm saying it out loud. I'm saying it in public. Those are the things I think that are going to win. I'm not trying to dabble in Amazon. I'm not trying to dabble in Disney. I'm not trying to take the S&P 500. Those are all propped up by fiat. And over a long enough time, this was a guy, and I have to look this up, but he said basically, if you take out the inflation, none of the S&P, like on an average over 100 years, has actually gained value. It's basically just stayed with the inflation that we actually have. So that's why if you invest, like you may seem more rich than other people, but you're actually just holding your same amount of like economic ability throughout your life as basically other people drop off. So relative to them, you may seem like you're more wealthy, but it's really the only people like Steve Jobs or, Elon Musk who basically just say, I'm going to pick 2 or 3 horses and we're going to go.
Yeah. Jeff,
Jeff's a riot, dude. Jeff, I still need to figure out how we can do a long-term. Jeff and I tried to connect.
This guy's my new best friend.
Issues. Oh my God.
For this reason.
All my long-term investment is real estate and all my immediate is the Laughing Otter. Laughing Otter is his NFT project, by the way.
Is an NFT broadcast. Real quick, Allison asked a great question, a thought for the future. Does the volatility of Bitcoin reduce to some extent its utility as store value? For me, it does. For Jarrett, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't for me either. I think it's more of a long-term play. Like volatility only matters for your time frame.
Exactly.
Like a 90% drop in a day is a big deal, but then a 90% drop over 10 years, maybe not so much. You don't feel that, and especially in the way that we do math, where everything is based on the percentage of the previous period. It doesn't look like a 90% drop. It just looks like a 3% drop every year. And then most people can live with that.
Yeah, and Jay, you hit the thing spot on. And Grant, sorry if I just cut you off
No,
there,
go
but
ahead.
it's
No,
like
go ahead.
people will say, "Oh, Bitcoin went from essentially 70,000 down to roughly 15,000," and they'll say, "Oh, it's failed." And I'm like, okay, so it dropped 80% after having gone up like 2,000,000% in the last 10 years. This is just how we prospectively look at things. And because we live, oh, bye, Jeff. Because we live in these quarterly time frames, people are really crappy with giving like the props to the actual growth that's happened for companies, Bitcoin, and just other things. Your team could win the Super Bowl 7 times, and then they lose one playoff, and everyone's like, "Oh, your team sucks." It's like, okay, so
I'm a big
perspective and
fan of not
timeline.
redefining things. And I know that as technology progresses, language changes. And I understand that. And maybe we do need a new definition of storehouse of value. But if you just read the fucking definition, volatility does destroy something's utility as a store of value. And so I don't mind redefining these terms if we call out the current understood definition of these terms is different than future value. It's different than whether or not it's a good investment. But volatility has a definition that is understood. Storehouse of value has a definition. Now, based on the definition of store value, money is not a good store value either. Typically, money is defined as storehouse of value, minimum exchange, and a standard of measure. But with the fiat system, we have lost because the definition of store of value is an asset that retains its purchasing power in the future and is the function of an asset that can be saved, retrieved, and exchanged at a later time for the same value or better. Now, I know that we are believers. I know that, Jarrett, you're a believer in crypto. And because you're so confident in the future of that thing, you could easily make the definition of that the storehouse of value. And I agree that maybe that's how we need to evolve the definition. But when I'm talking to the layperson, and that layperson is trying to get their Web2 TradFi head around it, I would be the first to admit with them, this is not a store of value. This is a very good possible future investment. Hands down. Because I want to preserve language as much as possible in order to make the conversation flow. So when I disagree with those terms, that's the only reason I'm disagreeing is we're playing fast and loose with the definition. And what we're really trying to do is we're trying to soften the haters of Bitcoin, because the haters do paint it like it's more volatile than this, it sucks than that. But it's like, no, can we just say it's a good future investment? Because I think it is, not financial advice, but I think it's a good investment, but I do not think it's a store of value. I do not think it's involatile. I think it has a good future, especially if you look out over a long enough timeline. It's on a great trajectory, and I'm buying up. But I don't know. I get bent out. What do you got, Jay?
It's a bad get-rich-quick scheme.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Nothing's ever been more true. And I think I want to call it, Amina's comment here says, I heard Michael Saylor's, and I've heard him say this, which is amazing, saying rebalancing is selling the winner to buy the loser. And I think rebalancing, if you do it too often, can be just looking for shiny objects. You really need long-term conviction. I've had long-term conviction with Bitcoin since 2017. It hasn't really let me down. And I'm going to buy and hold minimally through 2032 through that halving. And when it's going to probably be over $1 million, it's going to be ridiculous. Like brains are going to melt.
You know what I mean? Like I know what Michael is saying here, and I know what we are saying when we say this, and we kind of snicker. But also, the winner and the loser is temporary. You buy low and sell high. And if you happen to have something that's low and high, like just as a counterpoint, and I do agree, like that is a fun new way to look at rebalancing. And I do not believe in the process of rebalancing a portfolio myself. I do not believe in that, except in extreme situations. So I would agree that rebalancing is bad. But also, I don't want to shame someone who's like made profits and then their long-term hold. Coca-Cola's in the dump. Like right now, I just bought a ton of Fannie Mae. Like I'm not rebalancing, but my portfolio did adjust because I sold off something that I was super high on. And I bought into something I believe in the long term. So I don't want to shame anyone who is like taking profits and then doubling down on stuff they believe in. But I do believe in the spirit of calling out rebalancing. Yeah, that process for money managers is kind of shady. I would agree with that. But man, gurus have been pissing me off lately. That if you can't tell, like these like quips and idioms that people pull out, you're like, wait a minute, like the average. And this is what I was thinking about diversification. The only reason I'm a fan of diversification is I accept that the average person listening to this show or any show will not do the homework.
Yeah.
And I
100%,
believe
100%.
I believe everyone should cover their bases, get a few good investments, S&P, Vanguard 500, whatever. Get a few good investments that will maybe grow that you can leave a little kitty to your family. I agree with you though. These people who have doubled down on one thing or two things, those ponies that run, I do agree that's a better play, but I personally would never play at those without having built my base first. Like to me, it's the guaranteed millionaire plan. I want to guarantee that I will retire a millionaire. And I have a guaranteed plan to do that. It's guaranteed, and it's based on a degree of diversification. Now, what I wake up and do is what Jeff does. I bet on shit like the Laughing Otter or Shido. Where's Victor? You know,
Victor doesn't like these episodes because Victor's time horizon is 5 minutes. So
5
when I
minutes,
say 10 years, he like melts his brain.
When he posts his charts, if you look, you're like, that's literally
I know
it's
within 4 seconds and it went up and he's like millionaire. I love I'm gonna do some leverage trading. I'm gonna take $10 and put it into some leverage and just see what happens, just to learn, like just from like an educational thing. And I think you gotta. I don't think any lessons are free, even though everyone wants to tell you they are. The best lessons in life probably cost you money. We're a little bit over, but I think this was a really good conversation. And I think you're totally right, Grant. I don't expect most people that have exposure to the market in the United States is just through a 401k. And they basically created a 401k to get the average person who doesn't have time because they've got 6 kids. They're coming home. They've got to mow the lawn. Then they got to take all their kids to like soccer, baseball, basketball, volleyball, and wrestling practice. And they're just going to say, you know what? This is what everyone else does. I trust this. Let me do this. I totally get that. So I definitely think that that's like the best way to do it. But I do think if you are going to go, you got to put all your money in a bank. But the thing about those ponies running is maybe you put all your money in Enron in 2000. That didn't work out. Maybe you put all your money in any one of the big companies that everyone said was going to change the world and didn't, right?
Yeah.
So your pony has to win. That's the thing. And that's where the higher risk comes from. But with greater risk, potentially comes greater reward. And that's definitely the game with crypto that Bitcoin maxis would play there. So,
yeah. And I want to hear the stories. Like we hear, look at the successful. They bought fewer stocks. Great. They doubled down on one thing. Do you know how many people failed holding on to one thing? And we never tell those stories as well. We just look at the successful and we extrapolate that's why they were successful. And it could be, but it could be a lot of things. And I guess what I encourage is critical thinking. I want someone to think critically about their investments. I want them to know the definition of these terms so that they don't skim the next headline, jump on Wall Street bets, think they're smart. Maybe they made 10x that day. The next day, they pushed it all on, I bet it all on red because I'm super smart. And it's like, no, you got lucky and you're not thinking critically. You know, I really want people to win because they're thinking critically, you know?
Yeah, I don't think anyone thinks that they're a winner right now in the market. And if you do, you need to wait a week. But I do think there were a lot of people in 2021, that summer, who just thought they were the wolf of all streets. Not the wolf of Wall Street, of all streets, because they put a little money in Robinhood. They saw it triple in a month. Put a little money in Cardano, or however you pronounce it, and it went up. Put a little money in Ethereum, and that went up. You know,
and then they started tweeting, "When friends, when Lambo friends."
Yeah, and now they're all gone, and they're all exit liquidity. Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. So smart stuff. So shout outs. I'll do mine real first. My shout out is to those people who have made bets and have won and lost and still are at it, learning, understanding, and playing smarter at every round. The average Joe who knows that they're not a loser if they've diversified, or they're not a loser if they focused and lost, but they show up today and tomorrow. Because I will say, this is buying season for me. And though it's low and everyone's feeling a little pinched because they might have made some bad bets, it's buying season for me. So my shout out is for the average Joe who might have won, who might have lost, for whatever their strategy. You're not a loser. Step to the plate, learn something new, and keep going with us. That's my shout out.
Yeah. Shout out to everybody investing in themselves this year. You know, not heeding to the call of the market.
Yeah. If you have watched any of our episodes, cherry pick by random, throw a dart and hit any 1 out of 4 of the last 16 episodes, and you will know that I think I call bullshit too. Jay says the only thing he invests in is himself. And like every now and again, he sneaks that he owns a parcel of land in St. Kitts.
Yeah. He also probably owns he's like, oh, I've got tokenized real estate of the Taj Mahal, but I can't touch it till I'm 60. Like he's got that type of shit in him, you know, like.
Okay. Shout out to those who invest in themselves like Jay. Okay. I hear you. What do you got, Jarrett?
Jay, just such a troll. I want to give a shout out to Leslie, who's my coworker and just maybe starting to sink her, dip some toes into crypto. And it's cool that she hopped on. And I thought her question is super relevant because she's clearly picking up the need in crypto philanthropy, or how people can use crypto to do good in the world. To kind of looking at maybe a Web 2 solution, which is a DAF, and saying, hey, how does that work? Like, is there something where we can put crypto into a community pot and then use it as the community decides, which is totally the dream of the DAO, right? So shout out to Leslie for hopping on. Shout out to anyone else who's new to the channel. And we will be back next Tuesday, 3:30 Eastern time, back here wherever you're watching us, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So follow us there.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great afternoon.